In this video, I'd like to talk about some human-scale and small-scale irrigation techniques, very rudimentary rain collection systems, some simple strategies for taking an overabundance of rain at certain points and having that overflow aim to some meaningful and easy-to-access spaces, and touch on at least a little bit the idea of very, very simple and easy-to-implement solar-powered ways to move water slowly and steadily when the sun is shining. I'm going to start here, which is the least lovely visually part of the operation, but I think it's good for folks to see the lowest common denominator of what you can get away with and still have things work. There are lots of videos out there around rainwater collection that are complex and perfectly filtered and all that, and that's great. Go for that if that's what you want. This has been in motion for 6 years. It's worked just fine. And what we have here is an IBC tote. I'm going to link here to a video where I, in very thorough detail, show the whole setup of how we put these together, and you can take that for what it's worth. For all these years, we've had a very simple screen. When it's raining like crazy, I'll take this out and tap it and slip it back in. Yes, this allows for mosquitoes, but we've got lots of frogs around. There are bats in the evening. There are dragonflies that fly around the ponds. They seem to get balanced, but that could be better for sure. And we've got an overflow here. And one thing I want to talk about is when we're loading our tanks to water from, we've got a little valve here that we can open up, and you can see that cracked in the winter, but it only seems to spill when it's halfway open. So we'll switch that out only when it's really bad. If I want to get crazy, I can put a little cup right under there, collect those drippings and use that for something else. The key to systems like this, where you're storing water from roofs and then using it all throughout your gardens, is you have to let go of the idea of being able to walk around with a hose and spray down your plants, and instead consider delivering that stored or that captured water to open simple tanks that are closer to where you need them. So that hose ends up here and can fill this tank, and we can dip in with these watering cans, fill them in a few seconds, and be able to water quickly and effectively with a passive gravity-fed flow of water. So it's all about having open batteries throughout the landscape. Learned this lesson the hard way in the past. Opened up the valve, and then time for lunch, time for dinner, walk away, and it fills, and then overflows. So here's a note or an idea to think about. When you have spaces collecting water or redistributing water, what happens when the inevitable happens, which is an overflow state? Where does that meaningfully go? So here's a simple solution. It overflows, we say yes to that, and here's a high tunnel. We know we need lots of water for a high tunnel because it does not get rain naturally. And while the water's running, go in with a shovel, shave the walkway, put all that soil up on the beds, and now the overflow becomes a bottom flood irrigation system. So the whole high tunnel gets water all through it, and that water can get soaked in laterally to the beds. Now that doesn't serve the needs of tiny, tiny seedlings. We still have to water those from above. But these parsleys, the tomatoes, the plants that are getting established now have the benefit of incredibly deep, deep irrigation with no water on their leaves, so much less potential for disease and pressures like that. So by opening the valve, this entire high tunnel gets watered. Now the water's coming in fast enough that that's more water than we need for that purpose. So in this case, I simply drilled a little hole in the side of the tank, an improper size for the fitting that I found in a drawer, so it leaks, but a little Teflon tape makes it leak less, but who cares, because it's all going to that greenhouse or the high tunnel to water it. And here's a little T where I took an old section of dumpstered hose. Try not to buy brand new hose. On Craigslist or FreeCycle, people are throwing these out all the time, and with a 5/8 inch fitting, you can use a pair of pruners to snip your hose and fit it on. You don't even need a hose clamp. And now a second split of that overflow can come this way along the garden and dump out into a whole other little minor watershed. And there it is, trickling out. And so once that water started running, I could go through with a very tiny garden trowel and just trench out a little waterway that goes down. Took that soil and put it in the bed because it's nice and hydrated now. And so now as that tank overflows from the rain collection, it's basically irrigating this entire block of garden, again with subsurface irrigation. It's a plume, so it'll soak very, very deeply in. And we could mulch this channel, but we could also just let it overflow. You can see I've had this on for about 10 minutes. This is how far it's gotten. And it'll just slowly creep its way down the line, past some strawberries, some cranberries, around the bend, over to some grafted apples, some seedling garlic and goumis, and wick water this entire downslope area gently, thoroughly, and deeply. This is almost the utter antithesis of setting a sprinkler system and spraying the air. It's soaking the soil where the plants actually need the water. And that's all set in motion by simply opening the valve from that rainwater tank, acknowledging the fact that I get distracted and that this will overflow sometimes, and saying yes to that. And where does it go? You don't want to leave that until it's completely empty, but if I forgot about that for an hour or two, the high tunnel would not complain, and this entire garden system would not complain with the water that's weeping into the ground below. And now here's a tank in our main garden that its filled line is actually just slightly above the rainwater tank. So how are we getting water into that? It could be a solar panel or a battery attached to a pump on your rain tank that lifts it and loads it into delivery basins or open batteries of water higher in the landscape. But in this case, we're pulling water from a freshly dug pond upslope. We're here upslope from our property. There's the garden. You can hear the pump going or the water splashing. And we are in our neighbor's lawn to food forest space. I'll link to that playlist here. And we've got a pond. We just got an inch and a half of rain in the last few days, so the pond really filled up. It's murky. We still have a lot more excavation work to do, but there's water in here now. And so we're lifting it and storing it and sending it through the garden into the roots and the leaves of the plants from underground as much as possible. And here's a system not completely gravity fed, not completely passive, but also not very complex either. This is a very simple, low cost 12 volt solar panel. Very clearly, I don't know that much about this stuff. Basically, I wired in, I think this is like old extension cord cable that I found. And you can hear it running. It seems like it would be dangerous, but I don't have a battery attached to this, and it's a very low voltage, low wattage. There's just some clips on there, and underneath, floating under this board, I'll link in the description to this pump, but you could replace this with a bilge pump or all sorts of different things. I think that little pump would be much happier with an actual battery and a charge controller to smooth out voltage, but it's underwater. It has a little screen on it, keeps it cool, and sometimes very cheap little DC pumps are willing to accept a wide variety of voltages and wattages and still be okay. We'll see. This is about $22 pump. That solar panel runs the pump, which lifts the water through this 1/2-inch PEX. Maybe you find a bilge pump that actually runs on standard garden hose. In this case, I bought the PEX, but it runs over and fills that tank. And now there's a place in the garden where fresh, cold water can be stored in a place where it's easy to take a watering can and dip in and bring it around the garden. Again, we're not going to walk around and water everything with that low flow of a rate there, but it works really well for dipping and watering. This could very easily be connected through this hose to another tank that's at the same elevation on the far end of the garden. But for now, I just made an overflow state with a little hole and again some scrap hose that comes over to the other side of the garden. You can see there's some good length there, and it just weeps out. So I can do the same basic trick as I did with the overflow state of this and dig a swale that's on contour to wick water everything down slope. On contour does not mean a laser level and an A-frame. It simply means digging while water is in the element. You dig it out and send it this way or that way. You do it based on the feedback from the water, and you have a live water level that is perfectly 100% accurate, and you have no tools other than the shovel to do the work. But for now, we'll let the overflow just weep out into this walkway, which can wick into the beds nearby and slowly but surely trickle its way past some nursery beds, past the elders, and slowly drop back into a pond system where the frogs will appreciate any wasted water. Likewise, this cistern is intentionally associated right next to a lull in the landscape where we have some drainage ditches, catchment ponds, and the like already. So when inevitably this overflows because of my neglect or forgetting that it's running, it'll go and feed in some ponds, water some calamus, and gently move through some swales in the landscape, irrigating everything downslope gently and slowly. Just like with pretty much every project you see on the Edible Acres YouTube channel, and probably more channels and more projects than are willing to admit it, this is not a perfectly designed system that was executed in one fell swoop. This is iterative, this is observe and interact. This is, oh, I forgot to turn that valve off and there's a huge pool of water sitting in the lawn or in a walkway. What do I do to fix that so that next time it's a little bit better? It's thinking through layers and limiting factors of saying, well, I can get water slowly and steadily into this area. How do I actually store it in a way that then can be used effectively? And rather than going way more complex with even more solar panels, more pumps, more tubes, we can simply take some simple cans and water. So part of it is about distilling out the excess. The next phase of this project will be to take, once the high tunnel is overflowed, and slowly dig out with the garden trowel around these rose campion, around the lemon balm, and around this whole patch of nursery on the north side of the high tunnel, and figure out how to get the water to gently coax its way into this whole scene. I don't know how that'll happen yet, but the water will teach me as I go. It'll be slow and steady. That's how good things are. Capture and store energy. Love it.